Introduction. The Lord declares, "Whenever true religion declines and irreligion prevails, I manifest myself, and in every age I incarnate to establish spiritual law and to destroy evil." Bhagavad Gita. Saviors. India has produced many great spiritual leaders who are recognized and worshipped as saviors of mankind. The life and character of each of these were as wonderful, superhuman, and divine as were those of the illustrious Son of Man. Each has been like the embodiment of all divine attributes. Each has been the giver of new life to the old spiritual truths, and the generator of that tidal wave of spirituality which has again and again inundated the religious world, surmounting the barriers of superstition and prejudice, and carrying the stream of individual souls towards the ocean of divinity. The present upheaval of the spiritual tide, the waves of which, traversing nearly half the world, have touched the shores of America, was produced by the Christ-like character and divine personality of Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna, revered and worshipped in India today as an ideal manifestation of the divine glory. His life was so extraordinary and unparalleled that within 10 years after his departure from earth, it aroused the admiration, wonder, and reverence not only of all classes of people in his own country, but of many distinguished English and German scholars of the 19th century. Life of Sri Ramakrishna by European scholars. A short account of the life of Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna appeared for the first time in the January number of the Imperial and Quarterly Review of 1896 under the title of A Modern Hindu Saint. It was an able article penned by Professor C.H. Tawney, who was for many years the professor of Sanskrit in Calcutta University and the distinguished librarian of the Indian House of London. This article excited the interest of many European scholars, among whom Professor Max Müller showed his appreciation by publishing in the August number of the 19th Century of 1896 a short sketch of this Hindu saint's life, entitled A Real Mahatma. In this celebrated article, which was for some time the subject of most severe criticism both in England and India, among many of the Christian missionaries and the Theosophists, the noted professor showed the difference between the imaginary Mahatmas of the Theosophists and the real Mahatman, or the great soul of India, who had reached God consciousness and had manifested divinity in all actions of his daily life. He gave a brief account of the extraordinary life of Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna, paying him the highest tribute of honor and respect that a Christian scholar could give to a divine manifestation in the so-called heathen land. Later, in 1898, he compiled and published Ramakrishna, His Life and Sayings, collecting more facts of his life and the sayings of this exemplary character perfumed with divine personality. Ramakrishna, a real Mahatman. Professor Max Müller was deeply impressed by the originality of this great saint and real Mahatman, who was not brought up within the precincts of any university and who drew the water of his wisdom neither from any book nor scripture, nor from any ancient prophet, but directly from the eternal fountainhead of all knowledge and wisdom. He was also struck by the broad, liberal, and absolutely unsectarian spirit which pervades the utterings of Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna. Indeed, the life and sayings of the Bhagavan have given a death blow to the sectarian bigotry and fanaticism of the so-called religious world. Whosoever has read his sayings is impressed with the universality of his spiritual ideas, which embrace the ideals of all mankind. From his childhood, Sri Ramakrishna fought against all sectarian doctrines and dogmas, but yet at the same time he showed that all sects and creeds were but the paths which lead sincere and earnest souls to the one universal goal of all religions. Having realized the highest ideal of every religion by following the methods and practices of the various sects and creeds of the world, Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna gave to humanity whatever spiritual experience and realization he had acquired. Every idea which he gave was fresh from above and unadulterated by the product of human intellect, culture, or scholastic education. Each step of his life, from babyhood to the last moment, was extraordinary. Every stage was like the unfoldment of a chapter of a new scripture especially written out by the unseen hand to fit the minds of the East and the West, and to fulfill the spiritual needs of the 20th century. Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna is not only the greatest saint of modern India, but he is the real Mahatman. A real Mahatman as described in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 7, verse 19, is one who, having realized the Absolute, perceives the Divine Being in all animate and inanimate objects of the universe. His heart and soul never turn away from God. He lives in God consciousness, and divine qualities constantly flow through his soul. He cares neither for fame nor power nor worldly prosperity. A true Mahatman has no attachment to his body or to sense pleasures. He is a living God. He is absolutely free, and his inner nature is illumined by the self-effulgent light of divine wisdom, and his heart is overflowing with divine love. His soul becomes the playground of the Almighty. His body and mind become the instrument of the divine will. And Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna was such a real Mahatman. Even in this age when the vast majority of educated people do not believe in the existence of God and of the human soul, when scientific knowledge has turned the minds of students away from the path of spirituality, when sense pleasures and the luxuries of life have become the ideals of earthly existence, and human beings have degenerated into money-making machines, we have witnessed with our eyes a great soul who is recognized as a real Mahatman by hundreds and thousands of thoughtful men and women of India, Europe, and America. This great soul manifested his divine qualities and lived in God consciousness at every moment of his earthly career. And today thousands of people prostrate before his picture and worship him as the latest manifestation of divinity. Whosoever has heard of his most wonderful life has felt in his soul that Ramakrishna was the perfect ideal of mankind. Ramakrishna's influence upon the mind of scholars. He made his appearance in an obscure part of Bengal where he passed his early boyhood, but his youth and maturity were spent near Calcutta, the capital of British India, as cosmopolitan a city as London, New York, or any other large city of the civilized world, and the seat of education, refinement, and scientific knowledge. He allowed the skeptical minds of the students and professors of colleges and universities, as well as of educated men and women of the world, to come in direct touch with the self-effulgent light of divine wisdom which was shining in its full glory through his childlike, soft, and tender form. Scholars and intelligent people of all classes poured from every quarter to that spot which was sanctified by the presence of the Bhagavan. He was the living example of the spiritual greatness and divinity which has been manifested by the great incarnations like Christ, Buddha, Krishna, Rama, Chaitanya, and other saviors of the world. We know a number of skeptics and agnostics who had never believed in Christ or Buddha or Krishna as divine incarnations, who have never accepted the authority of the Scriptures, but on the contrary had maintained that the lives of Christ and of other saviors were but exaggerated accounts based upon the imagination of their disciples, anxious to deify their human masters. Such skeptics and unbelievers, when they met Ramakrishna and watched his superhuman life, were convinced that the lives of Christ, Buddha, Krishna, and other avatars must have been true and real. The same skeptics, when they beheld his divine powers, were so deeply impressed with his personality that they prostrated before him, kissed the dust of his holy feet, and realized that he was the personification of the Sermon on the Mount, the incarnation of divinity on earth, and the re-manifestation of Christ, Buddha, Krishna, and Chaitanya in one form. All the special qualities and divine powers that had adorned the wonderful character of each of these great personages were witnessed by them in this uncommon divine manifestation of the 19th century. Ramakrishna is the divine ideal of all sects. Have we not watched with admiration when the followers of all the great religions of the world recognized in Sri Ramakrishna their divine ideals? Have we not seen how Quakers and Orthodox Christians knelt and prayed before him and worshipped him as the Christ when the Bhagavan went into superconscious communion with the Heavenly Father after hearing the holy name of Jesus of Nazareth? The Mohammedan saints who came to see him prostrated at his holy feet and recognized in him the highest ideal of Islam. The Buddhists regarded him as Sambuddha, the enlightened. The followers of Chaitanya, like Vaisnava Charan, and others worshipped him as the second prophet of Nudaya when Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna occupied the altar which was reverentially dedicated to Sri Chaitanya by hundreds of devoted Vaisnavas who always prostrated before that altar and prayed to their Lord, Gauranga. The worshippers of Krishna called him the incarnation of Krishna. The devotees of the Divine Mother realized that the Mother of the universe was playing through him. The followers of Shiva declared that Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna was their living deity, while the Sikhs, the faithful votaries of Guru Nanaka, regarded him as their holy master. His followers, seeing all these powers, marveled at his greatness and believed that his many-sided personality was the living example and the consummation of all the previous avatars and divine manifestations. And the truth of this was again and again verified and confirmed by his acts as well as by his own words. He, who was Krishna, Rama, Christ, Buddha, Chaitanya, has now become Ramakrishna. Bhagavan was always conscious of this truth and spoke of it before the world as well as before his dearest disciples. His mission. As his divine personality was many-sided, yet one, so was his great mission. It was to show the underlying unity in the variety of religions and to establish that universal religion of which sectarian religions are each but partial expressions. Like all saviors, the life of the Bhagavan exemplified his mission. He spent the best part of his life in practicing in full the different methods of yoga. He went through every minute detail of the devotional exercises and different forms of worship ordained by the scriptures of different nations and practiced by the followers of the various sects and creeds of the world. His object in devoting so much time to these practices was to find out whether they had any real value in the path which leads to perfection. Ramakrishna's mind was always open to truth. He would not accept anything on second-hand authority. He would not believe in anything because it was written in a book or because it was declared by some great personage. He must know the truth firsthand. Before accepting any statement, he must realize it in his own life, and then he would speak of his personal experience to others in order that they might gain benefit from it. For nearly 12 years, before he appeared in public or made any disciples, Sri Ramakrishna, like a scientific investigator, inquired into the beliefs of the various sects of every religion, followed their methods, and performed their rituals and ceremonies with perfect faith and earnest devotion that he might realize the goal which could be reached by each of them. To his great surprise, however, he discovered that he arrived at God consciousness through each sectarian method. Whenever, furthermore, he desired to follow any particular path, there came to him a perfected soul of each sect who had realized the ideal to direct him in that path. Every one of these great saints recognized in Sri Ramakrishna the manifestation of divine powers, when in a short time he attained to that which they had not been able to acquire during years of austerity, worship, and extreme devotion. Having finished his investigations, he was ready to proclaim his message and give to the world the fruits of his own experience and realization. But unlike other spiritual teachers, he did not go out in search after his disciples and followers. As a fragrant flower does not hunt for bees but waits patiently for the bees to come, so the full-blown flower of spirituality in the form of Sri Ramakrishna waited for his disciples to come to him in the temple garden at Dakshineswar on the bank of the Ganges. When Ramakrishna had attained to the highest ideal of each yoga and had realized the spiritual oneness with the absolute Brahman and the Mother of the universe, rumors spread from mouth to mouth that Ramakrishna had reached perfection in this life. People from all quarters began to crowd around him. Pandits and scholars of every nationality, as well as hundreds of devout men and women of all sects, came to see him and listen to his original and wonderful teachings. This was the beginning of his public life as spiritual leader and guide, which continued for nearly 16 years. During this period, he did nothing but help mankind by freely distributing the priceless jewels of spiritual truths, which he had earned through such struggle, hardship, and austerities. His spiritual insight. Ramakrishna had a marvelous intellect and keen insight into the true nature of things and events, and using the commonest occurrences of everyday life as illustrations, he succeeded in making the dull minds of worldly people grasp the spiritual depth, beauty, and grandeur of his sublime ideals. He poured new life into every word that he uttered so as to touch the soul of his hearers. People listened with wonder and admiration to his original discourses on the most difficult problems concerning life and death, the nature and origin of the soul, the origin of the universe, and our relation to God. Realization of God. In this age of scientific rationalism, Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna has shown to the world how the Lord of the universe can be realized and attained in this life. And no one except him has ventured to go through all the tests of skeptics and agnostics to prove that he had attained to God consciousness. Those who have seen him, lived with him for years, and watched him by day and night have proclaimed before the world that he was the embodiment of the highest spiritual ideals of all nations, and that whoever worships him with faith and reverence worships the latest manifestation of divinity. The Bhagavan proved by his example that whenever there is extreme longing to see God, there is the nearness of the realization of the absolute truth. His life has given to the world a grand demonstration that even in this age, divinity can be reached, and divine perfection can be acquired by one who is pure, chaste, simple, and whose devotion is wholehearted and whole-souled. We have neither seen nor heard of a character purer, simpler, more chaste, more truthful, and more godly than that of this ideal Mahatma. He was like the personification of purity and chastity and the embodiment of truthfulness. His life was the life of absolute renunciation. Earthly pleasures and comforts meant nothing to him. The only pleasure, comfort, or happiness which he cared for was the blissful state of Samadhi, or God consciousness, when his soul, liberated from the bondage of body and mind, soared high in the infinite space of the Absolute. This Samadhi was a natural state with Ramakrishna. He never had to make a special effort to attain it. We often heard him say that when he was 4 years old he went into Samadhi at the sight of the beautiful coloring of a tropical cloud. This realization he always remembered and often described in his conversation. And as he grew older, his Samadhi or ecstasy became stronger and deeper. His Samadhi. In his Samadhi, his body would become absolutely motionless, his pulse and heartbeat imperceptible. His eyes would be half open, and if anyone pressed his eyeball with the finger, his body would not move or show the least sign of sensation. He would remain in this state sometimes for a few minutes, sometimes for half an hour or an hour, and on one occasion he continued in it for 3 days and nights. Then he would come down on the plane of sense consciousness and relate his experiences. He had the power to separate himself from the cage of the physical organism and go into this state of divine communion at his will, and stay there as long as he wished. Frequently he told us that he reached such a height in Samadhi that if he had been like an ordinary mortal, he could never have returned to his body. That no mortal had ever come back from that kind of Samadhi, and that the Divine Mother gave him this power to return to this plane simply to help mankind and to establish his mission. His renunciation. To him God was father, mother, brother, sister, and everything. He recognized no earthly relations. He never coveted wealth, nor had he any earthly possession. He realized that gold had no more value than earth and became absolutely unattached to riches, understanding the transitoriness of the objects which can be acquired by wealth. He often said that immortality could not be purchased by money. It emphasized by his example the true meaning of the Vedic passage, neither by meritorious deed, nor by progeny, nor by wealth, but by renunciation alone the immortal truth can be acquired. Renunciation of the attachment to worldly things is the gate to God consciousness. Christ, Buddha, Chaitanya, Sankaracharya, and all other saviors and spiritual leaders of the world exemplified this by living the life of absolute renunciation. It is very rare to find in this age a perfect ideal of the renunciation of lust and of worldly attachment. Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna practiced the ideal of renunciation of riches to such an extent that he was able to make his body respond involuntarily to the touch of a coin by shrinking from it even in sound sleep. We have often seen him suffer pain when he was obliged to touch a coin of any metal. Who could be a more perfect ideal of renunciation in this age of materialism? He uplifted womanhood. Sri Ramakrishna taught that every woman, old or young, was the representative of the Divine Mother. He worshipped God as the Mother of the universe and frequently declared that his Divine Mother had shown him that all women represent divine motherhood on earth. For the first time in the religious history of the world was this ideal preached by any divine incarnation, and upon this depends the salvation of men and especially of women of all countries from immorality, corruption, and such other vices as prevail in a civilized community. By his living example, the Bhagavan established the truth of spiritual marriage on the soul plane, even in this age of sensuality. He had a wife whom he always treated with reverence, and whom he regarded as the manifestation of his Divine Mother. He never had any sex relation with her or with any woman on the physical plane. His wife, the Blessed Virgin Sarada Devi, is still living like an embodiment of holy motherhood with innumerable spiritual children around her. She, in turn, has always regarded the Bhagavan as her Blessed Mother Divine in a human form. Up to the last moment of his earthly career, the Bhagavan was absolutely pure, chaste, and a perfect child of his Divine Mother of the universe. Furthermore, Ramakrishna uplifted the ideal of womanhood on the spiritual plane by accepting his first guru or spiritual instructor in a woman form. No other savior or spiritual leader has ever given such an honor to womanhood in the annals of religious history. His mission. The mission of Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna was to show by his living example how a truly spiritual man, being dead to the world of senses, can live on the spiritual plane of God consciousness. It was to prove that each individual soul is immortal and potentially divine. His mission was to establish harmony between religious sects and creeds. For the first time, it was absolutely demonstrated by Ramakrishna that all religions are like so many paths leading to the same goal, that the realization of the same almighty being is the highest ideal of Christianity, Mohammedanism, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, Hinduism, as well as of all other smaller religions of the world. Sri Ramakrishna's mission was to proclaim the eternal truth that God is one, but has many aspects, and that the same one is worshipped by different nations under various names and forms, that he is personal, impersonal, and beyond both, that he is with name and form and yet nameless and formless. His mission was to establish the worship of the Divine Mother and thus to elevate the ideal of womanhood into divine motherhood. His mission was to show by his example that true spirituality can be transmitted and that salvation can be obtained through the grace of a divine incarnation. His mission was to declare before the world that psychic powers and the power of healing are obstacles in the path of the attainment of God consciousness. His divine powers. Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna possessed all the yoga powers, but he seldom exercised those powers, especially the power of healing diseases. Moreover, he always prevented his disciples from either seeking or exercising those powers. But one power, which we have seen him frequently exercise, was the divine power to transform the character of a sinner and to lift the worldly soul to the plane of superconsciousness by a single touch. He would take the sins of others upon his own shoulders and would purify them by transmitting his own spirituality and opening the spiritual eyes of his trite followers. The days of prophecy have passed before our eyes. The manifestations of the divine powers of one who is worshipped today by thousands as the latest incarnation of divinity we have witnessed with our eyes. Blessed are they who have seen him and touched his holy feet. May the glory of Sri Ramakrishna be felt by all nations of the earth. May his divine power be manifested in the earnest and sincere souls of his devotees of all countries and all ages to come, is the prayer of his child and servant, Abhedananda. Chapter 1. Sri Ramakrishna at the Temple of Dakshineswara, where Ramakrishna lived. Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna lived for many years in Rani Rasmoni's celebrated temple garden on the east bank of the Ganges, in the village of Dakshineswar, about 4 miles north of Calcutta. This temple with the garden attached was dedicated by its foundress, Rani Rasmoni, to the Divine Mother, Kali. In the northwest corner of the spacious temple compound is a small room which faces on the west to the waters of the sacred river Ganges. This room with its holy surroundings was consecrated as the dwelling place for many years of Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna, whose divine presence made the spot holier and more sacred, and it was from this retired corner that the rays of his divine glory, emanating from his God-intoxicated soul, dazzled the eyes of the seekers after truth and attracted them to him, as a blazing fire attracts moths from all quarters. Hundreds of educated men and women were drawn towards this superhuman personality, to listen with the deepest reverence to the words of wisdom uttered by one who had realized God and who lived in constant communion with the Divine Mother of the universe. Mahendra's visit to the temple. One Sunday in the month of March 1882, Mahendra, hearing from a friend about this divine man, was so deeply impressed that he came to the temple garden to pay him a respectful visit. It was the day of a special religious festival, and people had gathered in great numbers in Sri Ramakrishna's room and on the veranda. The Bhagavan was seated on a raised platform, and on the floor around him were Kedar, Suresh, Ram, Manmohan, Bijoy, and many other devotees. They gazed up into his radiant face and drank the nectar of the living words of divine wisdom that fell from his hallowed lips. With a smiling face, Sri Ramakrishna was speaking to them of the power of the Lord's holy name and true bhakti as the means of attaining God-vision. Addressing Bijoy, he asked, "What do you say is the means of attaining to God?" Power of the Lord's holy name. Bhagavan, by the repetition of his holy name, in this age the holy name of the Lord has saving powers. Yes, the holy name has saving powers, but there must be earnest longing with it. Without earnest longing of the heart, no one can see God by mere repetition of his name. One may repeat his name, but if one's mind be attached to lust and wealth, that will not help much. When a man is bitten by a scorpion or a tarantula, mere repetition of a mantram will not do. A special remedy is necessary. If that be the case, Bhajan, then how did Amjamila, who was the greatest of sinners and committed all sorts of crimes, obtain salvation by repeating the name of the Lord at the time of his death? Perhaps in his previous incarnations, Ajamila was righteous and performed a great many good deeds. Besides, it is said that he practiced asceticism later in this life. It may also be said that at the last moment of his life, the repetition of the holy name purified his heart, and therefore he attained salvation. When an elephant is washed, immediately he throws dust and dirt over himself, but if he is kept in a clean stall after his bath, then he cannot cover himself with dirt. By the power of the holy name a man may be purified, but he may once more commit sinful acts because his mind is weak. He cannot promise that he will never sin again. The water of the Ganges may wash away past sins, but there is a saying that sins perch on the top of trees. When a man comes out of the Ganges and stands under a tree, the sins drop over his shoulders and seize upon him. These old sins ride him, as it were. Therefore, repeat the holy name of the Lord, but at the same time pray to him that you may have true love and devotion for him, and that your love for wealth, fame, and the pleasures of the body may decrease, because they are transitory. They last only until tomorrow. All religions lead to God. When there is true devotion and love, one can reach God by any of the sectarian religions. The Vaisnavas, the worshippers of Krishna, will attain God in the same way as the Saktas, the worshippers of the Divine Mother, or the followers of Vedanta. Those who belong to the Brahmo Samaj, the Mohammedans, and Christians will also realize God through their respective religions. If you follow any of these paths with intense devotion, you will reach him. If there be any mistake in the path chosen, he will correct the mistake in the long run. The man who wishes to see Jagannath may go towards the south instead of towards the north, but someone will sooner or later direct him in the right way, and he will surely visit Jagannath in the end. The one thing necessary for realization is wholehearted and whole-souled devotion to God. Many names of one God. Vaisnavas, Mahometans, Christians, and Hindus are all longing for the same God, but they do not know he who is Krishna is also Shiva, Divine Mother, Christ, and Allah. God is one, but he has many names. The substance is one, but is worshipped under different names according to the time, place, and nationality of his worshippers. All the different scriptures of the world speak of the same God. He who is described in the Vedas as absolute existence, intelligence, bliss, or Brahman, is also described in the Tantras as Shiva, in the Puranas as Krishna, in the Quran as Allah, and in the Bible as Christ. Bigotry is not right, yet the various sects quarrel with one another. The worshippers of Krishna, for instance, say that nothing can be achieved without worshipping Krishna. Those who are devoted to the Divine Mother think that the worship of the Divine Mother is the only way to salvation. Similarly, the Christians say that no one can reach heaven except through Christ. He is the only way, and Christianity is the only religion. All other religions are false. This is narrow-mindedness. My religion is true while that of others is false. This kind of belief is not right. It is not our business to correct the errors of other religions. He who has created the world will correct them in time. Our duty in some way or other is to realize Him. God can be reached through many paths. Each of these sectarian religions points out a path which ultimately leads to divinity. Yes, all religions are paths, but the paths are not God. I have seen all sects and all paths. I do not care for them any more. People belonging to these sects quarrel so much. After trying all religions, I have realized that God is the whole and I am His part, that He is the Lord and I am His servant. Again, I realize He is I am He. God personal and impersonal. People dispute among themselves, saying, God is personal with form. He cannot be impersonal and formless. Like the Vaisnavas who find fault with those who worship the impersonal Brahman. When realization comes, then all these questions are settled. He who has seen God can tell exactly what He is like. As Kavira said, God with form is my mother. God without form is my father. Whom shall I blame? Whom shall I praise? The balance is even. He is with form, yet He is formless. He is personal, yet He is impersonal. And who can say what other aspects He may have? Parable of the Elephant and the Blind Men. 4 blind men went to see an elephant. One touched the leg of the elephant and said, "The elephant is like a pillar." The second touched the trunk and said, "The elephant is like a thick club." The third touched the belly and said, "The elephant is like a huge jar." The fourth touched the ears and said, "The elephant is like a big winnowing basket." Then they began to dispute among themselves as to the figure of the elephant. A passerby, seeing them thus quarreling, asked them what it was about. They told him everything and begged him to settle the dispute. The man replied, "None of you has seen the elephant. The elephant is not like a pillar. Its legs are like pillars. It is not like a big water jar. Its belly is like a water jar. It is not like a winnowing basket. Its ears are like winnowing baskets. It is not like a stout club. Its trunk is like a club. The elephant is like the combination of all these." In the same manner do those sectarians quarrel, who have seen only one aspect of the deity. He alone, who has seen God in all His aspects, can settle all disputes. Parable of the Chameleon. Again, 2 persons were hotly disputing as to the color of a chameleon. One said, "The chameleon on that palm tree is of a red color." The other, contradicting him, replied, "You are mistaken. The chameleon is not red, but blue." Not being able to settle the matter by argument, both went to the person who always lived under that tree and had watched the chameleon in all its phases of colors. One of them asked him, "Sir, is not the chameleon on that tree red?" The person replied, "Yes, sir." The other disputant said, "What do you say? It's not red, it's blue." The person again humbly replied, "Yes, sir." The person knew that the chameleon is an animal which constantly changes colors. Thus it was that he said yes to both these conflicting statements. The Sat-Chit Ananda, the absolute existence, intelligence, bliss, likewise has many forms. The devotee who has seen God in one aspect only knows Him in that aspect alone. But he who has seen Him in manifold aspects is alone in a position to say with authority, "All these forms are one God, and God is multiform." he is formless, and with form, and many are his forms, which no one knows. Different aspects of divinity. God is not only personal and with form, but he can take the form of Krishna, Christ, or any other incarnation. It is true that he manifests himself in infinite forms to fulfill the desires of his devotees. It is also true that he is formless, indivisible, existence, intelligence, bliss, absolute. Relation between God, personal and impersonal. The Vedas have described him to be both personal, with form and attributes, and impersonal, beyond all form and attributes. Do you know how this is? He is like the infinite ocean of absolute existence, intelligence, bliss. As in the ocean, intense cold will freeze a portion of the water into ice, which may float in various forms on the water. Similarly, intense devotion, bhakti, may condense a portion of divinity and make it appear in different forms. The personal God with form exists for the sake of his bhaktas, dualistic devotees. When the sun of wisdom rises, the block of ice melts and becomes water once more. Above, below, and on every side the infinite being pervades. Therefore there is a prayer in the scriptures, O Lord, thou art personal with form. Thou art also impersonal and formless. Thou hast manifested thyself in a human form and hast lived in our midst, but in the Vedas thou art described as beyond speech and mind, unspeakable, imperceptible, and unthinkable. But it can be said that for a certain class of bhaktas he is eternally personal, and always with form. There are places where the ice never melts. It becomes crystallized. Kedar asked Bhagavan, Bhagavan, it is also said in the scriptures, O Lord, thou art beyond speech and mind, but I have described thy personal form only. Do thou forgive me for this offense? Yes, God is with form and also formless. No one can say positively that he is so much and no more. To a devotee, bhakta, or lover of God, the Lord appears as a personal being with form. But to one who has attained to the state of selfless Samadhi, through the path of discrimination and knowledge, he is the formless, impersonal, and absolute Brahman. Evening at the temple. Night had fallen, and the priest were moving the lights before the shrines to the accompaniment of bells, cymbals, and drums. From the southern end of the garden was wafted the sweet music played by the temple musicians upon flutes and other instruments, the music being carried far over the Ganges until it was lost. The breeze blowing from the south was gentle and fragrant, with the sweet odor of many flowers. The moon was rising, and the garden was soon bathed in its soft silvery light. It seemed as if nature as well as man was rejoicing and holding herself in readiness for the sacred ceremony of the Arati, evening service. One by one, the disciples began to take their leave. Mahendra and his friend, who had been visiting the different temples, now wended their way back through the grand quadrangle to Sri Ramakrishna's chamber. Coming up to the door of the room, they noticed that it was closed. Near the door stood a maid-servant named Brinda. Mahendra spoke to her, saying, Well, my good woman, is the holy man in? Yes, he is in his room. I suppose he has many books to read and study. Oh, dear, no, not a single one. Everything, even the highest truths, is spoken by his tongue. His words are all inspired. Indeed, is he now going through his evening service? May we go in? Will you kindly tell him of our anxiety to see him? Why, you may go in, my children. Go in and take your seats before him. Thereupon they entered the room. No other people were there. Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna was alone, seated as in the afternoon on the platform beside his bed. Incense was burning and the doors were closed. Mahendra saluted the Bhagavan with folded hands. A mat was pointed out on the floor. At his word, Mahendra and his friend took their seats upon it. The Bhagavan asked him, What is your name? Where do you live? What are you? What has brought you to Barahanagor? Mahendra answered each of these questions, but he noticed that in the course of the conversation, Sri Ramakrishna's mind was fixed upon some other object, on which he was meditating. He was only half conscious of the physical plane, and his attitude resembled that of a man quietly seated, rod in hand, intent on catching a fish. When the float trembles and the fish bites, the man eagerly looks at the float, grasping the rod with all his strength. He does not talk to anyone, but his whole mind is fixed upon the float. Such was the Bhagavan's concentration at this moment. Mahendra learned afterwards that this was the state of Samadhi or God consciousness which invariably came over him every day during the evening service. Very often in this state he would become absolutely unconscious of the external world. Mahendra, observing his abstraction, said to Sri Ramakrishna, "I am afraid, Bhagavan, that thou wouldst prefer to go through the evening service, Sandhya, alone. In that case we will not disturb thee any more, but will call some other time." Sri Ramakrishna replied, "Oh no, you need not be in a hurry." But he was silent again for a time. He then opened his lips and said, "Sanya, evening service, it is not that." A short while after, Mahendra saluted the Bhagavan, who in turn bade him good-bye, saying, "Come again." Chapter 2. Sri Ramakrishna with his disciples at the temple. The Bhagavan was in his room, seated in his usual place, on the small platform beside his bed. It was Sunday, and the room was filled with a large number of devotees. Among them was a young college student, only 19 years of age, named Narendra, who afterwards became the world-renowned Swami Vivekananda. Everyone noticed, even at the time, that he was a sincere and earnest seeker after truth, and that his mind was above all worldly concerns. His eyes were shining with spiritual light, his face was aglow with innocence and simplicity, and his words were full of spiritual power. The Bhagavan was discoursing on worldly people who ridicule the worshippers of God, especially addressing Narendra. "What do you say, Narendra? Worldly men will speak all manner of things against godly people, but they should act like the elephant. When an elephant passes through a public road, dogs run after him and bark at him, but the elephant turns a deaf ear to their barking and goes on his way. Suppose, my boy, people should speak ill of you behind your back. What would you think of them? I would look upon them as a lot of barking dogs." God dwells in all. The Bhagavan laughed and said, "No, my friend, do not go so far as that. You should love everyone. No one is a stranger. God dwells in all beings. Without him nothing can exist." When Prahlada realized him, the Lord asked him to crave a boon. Prahlada replied, "When I have seen thee, what other boon do I need?" The Lord asked him again. He then prayed, "If thou wishest to grant me a boon, do thou forgive those who have persecuted me." Prahlada meant that by persecuting him they had persecuted the Lord dwelling within him. Know that God resides in all things animate and inanimate. Hence everything is an object of worship, be it men, beasts or birds, plants or minerals. In our relation with men, all that we can do is to take heed to ourselves, that we mix with good people and avoid bad company. It is true, however, that God resides in bad people also. Yes, even in a tiger. But surely it does not follow that we should embrace a tiger. It may be asked, why should we run away from a tiger when God is dwelling in that form? To this, the answer is that God abiding in our hearts directs us to run away from the tiger. Why should we not obey his will? Parable of the Disciple and the Mad Elephant. In a certain forest there lived a sage who had a number of disciples. He taught his disciples the truth. God dwells in all things. Knowing this, you should bend your knee before every object. One day a disciple went out into the forest for wood. On his way he saw a man riding a mad elephant and shouting, "Get out of the way! Get out of the way! This is a mad elephant." The disciple, instead of running away, remembered his master's teaching and began to reason. God is in the elephant as well as in me. God cannot be hurt by God, so why should I run away? Thus thinking, he stood where he was and saluted the elephant as he came near. The driver, Mahout, kept on shouting, "Get out of the way!" But the disciple would not move until he was snatched up by the mad elephant and dashed to one side. The poor boy, bruised and bleeding, lay on the ground unconscious. The sage, hearing of the accident, came with his other disciples to carry him home. When after some time the unfortunate pupil recovered consciousness, he described what had happened. The sage replied, "My boy, it is true that God is manifest in everything, but if he is in the elephant, is he not equally manifest in the driver, Mahout? Tell me why you did not pay heed to the warning of the driver." God in everything. The Bhagavan continued, "In the sacred scriptures it is written, God dwells in water, but some water can be used for divine service or for drinking purposes, some for bathing or washing, while dirty water cannot be touched even. In the same manner, although God resides in all human beings, still there are good men and bad men. There are lovers of God and those who do not love God. We should recognize divinity in all, but we should not mix with bad people or with those who do not love God. Our relation with them must not be very close. It is wise to avoid the company of such people. Narendra, what attitude should we hold when wicked people come to disturb our peace or do actually offend us? A person living in society should have a little tamas, the spirit of resisting evil, resistance for purposes of self-protection. But this is necessary only for outward show, its object being to prevent the wicked from doing harm to you. At the same time, you should not do actual injury to another on the ground that he has done injury to you. Parable of the Snake and the Holy Man. There was a very large venomous snake in a field. No one dared to go that way. One day a holy man, Mahatma, passed by that road, and the serpent ran after the sage to bite him. But when the snake approached the holy man, he lost all his ferocity and was overpowered by the gentleness of the yogi. Seeing him, the sage said, "Well, my friend, think you to bite me?" The snake was abashed and made no reply. At this the sage continued, "Hearken, friend, do not injure anyone in future." The snake bowed and nodded assent. The sage went his way, and the snake entered his hole and thenceforth began to live a life of innocence, without attempting to harm anyone. In a few days all the neighborhood concluded that the snake had lost his venom and was no longer dangerous. So everyone began to tease him. They pelted him with stones or dragged him mercilessly by the tail, and there was no end to his troubles. Fortunately, the sage again passed that way, and seeing the bruised, battered condition of the snake, was very much moved and inquired the cause. "Holy sir," the snake replied, "this is because I do not injure anyone after your advice, but alas, they are so merciless." The sage, smiling, said, "My friend, I simply advised you not to bite anyone, but I did not tell you not to frighten others. Although you should not bite any living creature, still you should keep people at a distance by hissing at them." And Sri Ramakrishna added, "There is no harm in hissing at wicked men and at your enemies, showing that you can protect yourself and know how to resist evil. Only you must be careful not to pour your venom into the blood of your enemy. Resist not evil by causing evil in return." Love for all. One of the devotees present said, "But when a person is annoyed with me, Bhagavan, I feel unhappy. I feel that I have not been able to love everyone equally." When you feel that way, you should have a talk with that person and try to make peace with him. If you fail after such attempts, then you need not give it further thought. Take refuge with the Lord. Think upon Him. Do not let your mind be disturbed by any other thing. Yes, Christ and Chaitanya have both taught us to love all mankind. A true devotee, always calm. You should love everyone because God dwells in all beings, but to wicked people you should bow down at a distance. To Bijoy, smiling. Is it true that people blame you because you mix with those who believe in a personal God with form? A true devotee of God should possess absolute calmness and never be disturbed by the opinions of others. Like a blacksmith's anvil, he will endure all blows and persecutions and yet remain firm in his faith and always the same. Company of the wicked. Wicked people may say many things about you and blame you, but if you long for God, you should endure with patience. One can think on God even dwelling in the midst of wicked people. The sages of ancient times who lived in forests could meditate on God although surrounded by tigers, bears, and other wild beasts. The nature of the wicked is like that of a tiger or bear. They attack the innocent and injure them. You should be especially cautious in coming in contact with the following. First, the wealthy. A person who possesses wealth and many attendants can easily do harm to another if he so desires. You should be very guarded in speaking with him. Sometimes it may even be necessary to agree with him in his opinion. Second, a dog. When a dog barks at you, you must not run, but talk to him and quiet him. Third, a bull. When the bull chases you, you should always pacify him by talking to him. Fourth, a drunkard. If you make him angry, he will call you names and swear at you. You should address him as a dear relative. Then he will be happy and obliging. When wicked people come to see me, I am very careful. The character of some of them is like that of a snake. They may bite you unawares. It may take a long time and much discrimination to recover from the effects of that bite, or you may get so angry at them that you will wish to take revenge. It is necessary, however, to keep occasionally the company of holy men. Through such association, right discrimination will come. 4 classes of individual souls. There are 4 classes of jivas, or individual souls. First, Baddha, the bound. Second, Mumukshu, the seeker after freedom. Third, Mukta, the emancipated. And fourth, Nitya Mukta, the eternally free. This world is like a net. The soul is the fish, and the lord of the phenomenal world is the fisherman. When the fisherman draws in his net, some of the fish try to escape by rending the net. That is, they struggle for freedom. So are the souls of the second class, the mumukshus, the seekers after freedom. But among the fish that struggle, only a few escape. Similarly, a few souls only attain to freedom, and they belong to the third class, the muktas. There are some fish, however, that are naturally cautious and never fall into the net. Such are the souls of the fourth class, the nitya muktas, who are never caught in the net of the phenomenal world, but who remain eternally free, like Narada and others like him. Most of the fish, however, fall into the net and have not the sense to know that they are going to die there. When caught, they try to run away and hide in the mud at the bottom by swimming with the net. They make no effort to get out of the net, but go deeper and deeper into the mud. These may be compared to the souls who are bound fast in the world. They are caught in the net, but they delude themselves by thinking that they are happy. They remain attached to worldliness. They plunge into the mire of worldly evils and are content, while those who are seeking after freedom or who are emancipated do not like worldliness and do not care for sense pleasures. Bound souls. Those who are thus caught in the net of the world are the baddha, or bound souls. no one can awaken them. They do not come to their senses even after receiving blow upon blow of misery, sorrow, and indescribable suffering. The camel loves thorny bushes, and although his mouth bleeds when he eats them, still he does not cease to love them dearly, and no one can keep him away from them. The bound souls may meet with great grief and misfortune, but after a few days they are just as they were before. The wife may die or become unchaste. The man will marry again. His son may die. He will be extremely sorrowful, but he will soon forget him. The mother of the boy may be overwhelmed with grief for a short time, but in a few days she will once more be concerned for her personal appearance and will deck herself with jewels and finery. Such worldly people may be left paupers after marrying their sons and daughters, yet they will still beget children every year. They may lose their fortune by a lawsuit, but they will again go to the courts. They may not be able to support their children, to educate, feed, clothe, or house them properly. Still they will continue to have more. They are like the snake with a muskrat in its mouth. As the snake cannot swallow the rat because of its strong odor, neither can it throw it out because of its own bent teeth. So these bound souls, baddhas, although they may occasionally feel that the world is unreal, can neither give it up nor can they fix their minds on the reality of the universe. I once saw a relative of Keshab Chunder Sen, who was quite old, still playing cards as if the time for meditating on God had not come for him. There's another sign of a baddha, or worldly soul. If you remove him from the world and put him in a better place, he will pine away and die. He will work like a slave to support his family, and he will not hesitate to tell lies, to deceive, or to flatter in order to earn his livelihood. He looks upon those who worship God or who meditate on the Lord of the universe as insane. He never finds time or opportunity to think of spiritual subjects. Even at the hour of death, he will think and talk of worldly things. Whatever thought is strongest in the minds of worldly people comes out at the time of death. If they become delirious, they rave of nothing but material objects. They may go to places of worship, but so long as their minds are attached to the world, worldly thoughts will rise at the last moment. As a parrot may be taught to utter the Lord's holy name, but when attacked by a cat screams and gives its natural cry. So they may repeat the holy name of the Lord, but when attacked by death, the natural tendency of their minds will predominate. What thou thinkest thou shalt become. It is said in the Bhagavad Gita that the future is determined by the thought that is uppermost at the moment of death. And in the Purana, there is a story that King Bharata was born as a deer because when he died, his mind was fixed on the thought of a deer. He who passes away thinking of God and meditating on him does not come back to this world. Concentration and meditation. Bhagavan, will a man who thinks of God but who does not meditate on him at the time of death be born again? An ordinary soul who has no faith in God may think of him for a time, but easily forgets him again and becomes attached to the world. If, however, he concentrates his mind upon God at the last moment of his life, his heart and soul become purified and remain so even after death. People suffer on so much because they have no faith in God. In order to be able to think meditation of God at the time of death, we must prepare our mind by constant practice. The practice of meditation on God will create a tendency of the mind to think of Him spontaneously, even at the last moment. Bhagavan, what condition of mind is necessary for a worldly person to attain freedom? If, by the grace of the Lord, strong dispassion for worldly things arises in his mind, then such a person becomes free from all earthly attachment. Dispassion. What is this strong dispassion? Let me tell you. Ordinary dispassion makes the mind think of the Lord occasionally, but there is no longing in the heart. Strong dispassion, on the contrary, makes the mind dwell constantly on the Lord with the same intense longing as a mother feels for her only child. He who has strong dispassion does not want anything but the Lord. He looks at the world as a deep well and is always fearful lest he may fall into it. Earthly relations seem to him very distant. He does not seek their company. His whole heart and soul yearn for God. He does not think of his family, nor does he think of the morrow. He also possesses great spiritual force. Parable of the Farmer and the Canal. Let me explain this to you by a parable. In a certain place there had been a long drought. The farmers were irrigating their fields by canals, bringing water from a long distance. One farmer had great determination and force of character. One morning he made up his mind that he would continue to dig his canal until he had connected it with the river and brought the water to his field. He was so busy digging that he lost account of time. The hour for luncheon came and passed. His wife called him to come home, wash, and eat. "The luncheon is getting cold. Leave your work until tomorrow," she urged. At first he paid no heed to her words, but when she repeated her request, he bade her go home and not disturb him any more. "You have no sense," he said. "With this terrible drought, we cannot grow anything. There will be no food for the children. The whole family will die of starvation. I have resolved that this very day I shall bring the water of the river to my field, and then I shall think of washing and eating." Hearing this, his wife ran home. The farmer worked hard the whole day, and toward evening he joined the canal to the river, and sat on one side with great delight as he saw the stream of water running into his field. His mind was then peaceful and happy. He went home and called his wife, saying, "Now give me a little oil and fill my pipe." And he washed, ate a hearty dinner, and enjoyed a sound sleep. This kind of determination and firmness of purpose must be at the back of strong dispassion. Another farmer who was trying to bring water to his field was likewise called by his wife at the hour of the noonday meal. "It is getting late. Come home and wash and eat," she said, and at once he dropped his spade and replied, "My dear, when you ask me to go, I must go." So his field remained dry. As a farmer cannot irrigate his field, so a devotee cannot attain to God without firm determination. When God is attained through such strong dispassion, all worldly attachment fades away. A householder may then live with his family, but he becomes unattached, and there is no more danger for him. If there be two magnets, one very large and the other very small, which do you suppose will attract a piece of iron? The larger one, of course. God is the greatest magnet. Compared to him, the attraction of the world is small and powerless. The sense of I. Bhagavan, why are we so bound to the world that we cannot see God? The sense of I in us is the greatest obstacle in the path of God vision. It covers the truth. When I is dead, all troubles cease. If by the mercy of the Lord one realizes I am a non-doer, instantly that man becomes emancipated in this life. This sense of I is like a thick cloud. As a small cloud can hide the glorious sun, so this cloud of I hides the glory of the eternal sun. If the cloud is dispersed by the mercy of a guru or spiritual master, the glory of infinite becomes visible. When Rama, the divine incarnation in a human form, was walking in the forest, Lakshmana, the individual soul who was at a short distance, could not see him because Sita, or Maya, or the sense of I, was standing between. Look at me. I cover my face with this handkerchief and you cannot see me. Still my face is there. So God is the nearest of all, but because of this sense of I, you do not see him. The soul in its true nature is absolute existence, intelligence, and bliss. but on account of Maya, or the sense of I, it has forgotten its real self, and has become entangled in the meshes of the various limitations of mind and body. Money is power. Each attribute limits the soul and modifies its nature. He who dresses smartly will naturally sing love songs, play cards, and carry a cane, and such things will appeal to him. If you have a pencil in your hand, you will unconsciously scribble on anything. Such is the power of the pencil. Money has great power. When a man becomes wealthy, his nature is entirely changed. He is a different being. A poor Brahmin, for instance, used to come here. He was very humble. He lived on the other side of the Ganges. One day, as I was landing from a boat, I saw him sitting at the riverside. Seeing me, he shouted in a disrespectful tone, "Hello, is it you, my good fellow?" Immediately I understood by his manner that he had got hold of some money. Otherwise he would not dare to address me thus. A toad had a rupee in its hole. An elephant was coming that way and passed over the hole. The toad was very angry. It came out and was about to kick the elephant, saying, "How darest thou pass over me?" Such is the power of wealth. It makes one so egotistic. 7 stages of spiritual evolution. The sense of I, however, vanishes at the approach of divine wisdom, which leads to superconsciousness, Samadhi, and eventually to God consciousness. But it is very difficult to acquire this divine wisdom. It is said in the Vedas that when the mind reaches the 7th stage of the spiritual evolution, the soul enters into Samadhi and instantly its sense of I disappears. The mind naturally dwells in the first 3 stages, the realm of worldly tendencies and animal propensities, and becomes attached to lust and wealth. When the mind dwells in the purified heart, spiritual light is perceived by the soul. At that time the soul exclaims, "What is this? What is this?" When it rises near the throat and remains there, the devotee loves to hear and speak of God. When the mind rises still higher, near the space between the eyebrows, it beholds the vision of the infinite being, whose nature is absolute existence, intelligence, bliss. The soul then desires to touch and embrace that being, but fails. As a light within a lantern can be seen but cannot be touched from outside, so the soul beholds the vision but cannot lay hold on it, cannot enter into it, cannot become one with it. In the 7th stage, however, the mind is bereft of the sense of I, enters into God consciousness, and realizes its oneness with the infinite. Bhagavan, what happens after reaching the 7th stage when divine wisdom comes? What does the man see? It cannot be described by words. In the 7th stage, when the mind goes into its casual form, Samadhi comes, and what happens then? No one can tell. Difference between soul and God. The sense of I, which makes one worldly and attached to lust and wealth, is the cause of bondage. The difference between the supreme and the individual soul is created by this sense of I which stands between. If you hold the stick on the surface of a stream, the water will appear to be divided into 2 parts. But in reality, the water is one. It appears as 2 because of the stick. The sense of I may be compared to the stick. Remove this limiting adjunct, and the current will be one and unbroken. What is this sense of I which clings to man? That which says, I am this, I am that, I possess so much wealth, I am great and powerful. Who is greater than I? If a thief has stolen 10 rupees and been detected, the owner takes his money first, then beats him, then hands him over to the police, and finally puts him in jail. The worldly I. The worldly I says, "Doesn't he know that he stole 10 rupees, which belonged to me? How dared he?" Difficult to be rid of I. Bhagavan, If we cannot get rid of worldliness except by losing the sense of I and Samadhi, is it not better to follow the path of wisdom which leads to Samadhi, since in the path of devotion, the sense of I still remains? Very few can get rid of the sense of I through Samadhi. It generally clings to us. We may discriminate 1,000 times, but the sense of I is bound to return again and again. You may cut the branches of a fig tree today, but tomorrow you will see that new twigs are sprouting. If this sense of I will not leave, then let it stay as the servant of God. O God, thou art my Lord, I am thy servant. Servant I of a Bhakta. Think in this way. I am his servant, I am his Bhakta, devotee. There is no harm in this kind of I. Sweet things cause dyspepsia and acidity, but crystallized sugar candy is harmless. The path of wisdom is very difficult. It cannot be followed so long as the sense of I is connected with the body. In this age, the consciousness of the body and the sense of I cannot be overcome easily. But in the path of devotion, through prayer and the repetition of his holy name with extreme longing, God can be reached without fail. Bhagavan, dost thou teach us to renounce the worldly I and not the sense of the servant I? Yes, the servant I, or I am the servant of God, I am his devotee. This egoism is not bad, but on the contrary, it helps us to realize God. Bhagavan, does he who has the sense of the servant I possess passion and anger? If this attitude of a servant be genuine and perfect, then passion and anger will drop off, leaving only a scar in the mind. This I of a bhakta or devotee does no harm to any living creature. It is like a sword, which after touching the philosopher's stone, is turned to gold. The sword retains the same form, but it cannot cut or injure anyone. The dry leaves of the coconut tree drop off in the wind, leaving a mark on the trunk. That mark proves that there was a leaf there at one time. Similarly, the scar of the sense of I remains in the mind of one who has realized God, but his whole nature is transformed into that of an innocent child. A child's I. The child's sense of I is not attached to worldly objects. He may like a thing at one moment, but the next moment he may dislike it. You can take from him an object of great value by giving him a doll worth a penny. To a child, everyone is equal. There is none greater or smaller. Therefore, a child has no sense of caste or creed. If his mother says, "He is your brother," however low his caste may be, the child will sit with him and eat with him without feeling dislike or difference of any kind. True devotion and love. Some bhaktas, after attaining to Samadhi or God consciousness, when they return the sense of I as I am his servant, I am his devotee. They do not lose the sense of I entirely, but keep a small portion of it to repeat the holy name of the Lord, to sing his praises, to love and serve him. Again, those who constantly practice this sense of servant I eventually reach the Supreme Lord. This is the path of bhakti or devotion. But true devotion is very rare. True devotion leads to intense love for God, and when that intense love comes, the divine being is not very far. In that intense love, the sense of worldliness is wiped out entirely, and the whole heart and soul rest upon nothing but the Lord of the universe. Some are born with this intense love for God. It is natural with them. Its expression is to be found even in their childhood. At that tender age even, they cry for God. There are many examples of such born bhaktas, like Prahlada and others. Ordinary devotion which is confined by scriptural laws of sacrifice and worship is preparatory. As in hot weather, one fans oneself for a breath of air so long as the breeze is not blowing. But when the breeze springs up, the fan is no longer needed. So when the breeze of intense love begins to blow in the soul, all devotional exercises like repetition of the name of the Lord, sacrifice, prayers, and asceticism become unnecessary. Devotion without intense love is the sign of the unripe bhakti. When it ripens, it leads into divine love, which is perfect and which brings the highest realization. Pure heart. Bhagavan, how can God be realized? God can be realized by the purified heart alone. Ordinarily the mind is stained with worldliness. God is like a magnet. The mind may be compared to a needle. If a needle be covered with thick mud, it is not attracted by the magnet. But when the mud is washed off, the magnet attracts it. Power of repentance. Similarly, when the mind is covered with the mud of worldliness, it does not feel the attraction of the Lord. But whosoever repents, saying, O Lord, I shall never again commit such an act, and sheds tears of true repentance, washes off all impurities, and the magnet of the Lord then attracts the needle of the mind. Instantly superconsciousness comes and is followed by God vision. The mercy of the Lord. A man may take thousands of attempts, but nothing can be accomplished without the mercy of the Lord. Without His mercy, no one can see Him, nor is it an easy thing to obtain His mercy. The egotistic sense of I, which says, I am the doer, must be abandoned entirely before the divine mercy can be felt. So long as there is a steward in charge of the storehouse, if any come to the master and beg him, saying, Master, wilt thou not come to the storehouse and give me this thing? He will reply, The steward is there, what need have I to go? In like manner, so long as the ego thinks of himself as the doer and the master of the storehouse of the heart, the real master does not enter there. The mercy of the Lord is the surest way to God vision. He is the Son of Wisdom. God, the Son of Wisdom. A single ray of this eternal sun illumines this world, and by that light we are conscious of ourselves and of one another, and we acquire various kinds of knowledge. Illustration of a bull's-eye lantern. If he turns that light towards his own face, then he becomes visible to his bhakta or devotee. In the night the watchman goes from place to place, holding in his hand the bull's-eye lantern. By its light he sees everyone's face, and people see each other, but no one can see him. If anyone wishes to see the watchman, he must beg him to turn the light towards himself. Similarly, he who wishes to see the Lord must pray to Him thus, O Lord, in Thy mercy do Thou turn the light of Thy wisdom towards Thine own face, that I may behold Thee. If there be no light in a house, that is the sign of extreme poverty. Therefore one must light the lamp of wisdom within the heart. O mind, why dost thou not see the face of the Divine Mother? By lighting the lamp of wisdom in the chamber of the soul.